And welcome back to Storytime with Dan Book. I appreciate you returning. Today we're going to carry on with the first chapter of Storytime of Sheriff in a Small Town, beg your pardon. And if you remember, Rocky is now going to visit the retired Sheriff Morgan to get some information on all what happened. He's met somebody whose father was sent to the electric chair, and from what he's reading, he thinks that this guy was innocent. So he's out to prove it or prove that he was guilty. So what we're going to continue on is where he's going to visit the sheriff to find out what he thinks of all this, because he was out of town at the time. Stepping outside, he gave his hair a quick comb and patted it down. Sheriff Morgan was held in such high regard by the community that he was still called sheriff, even though he had retired years ago. In fact, he still retained the authority if he ever wanted to use it. The door was opened to Rocky's knock by Agnes. She was a young, attractive woman about his own age. He had seen her about town and had been able to take her out quite a few times. She welcomed him in as a close friend. "If you've come to see Dad, he'll be down in bed. When he was still working, last night would have been his night on duty, so he was up all night and in bed by 5. Sheriff Morgan came down the stairs, stretching and yawning. He started when he saw Rocky sitting with a cup of coffee and a half-eaten biscuit. Agnes came back in with a pot and placed it on the coffee table. Kissing her father, she told him to sit down and she'd bring him in some more biscuits and jam. Rocky placed his cup and plate on the table, rose, and shook the sheriff's outstretched hand. "You're the newest reporter for the Sentinel, aren't you?" Rocky nodded and retrieved his cup. "Yes, sir. I'm doing some research on the Sue Holmes case. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions." Sheriff refilled his cup and lay back in his chair. Stretching his legs onto the ottoman, he shrugged. Far away, but sure. But if you've done any investigation at all, you'll know I wasn't here at the time." Rocky nodded, acknowledging that he already knew that. "It's more the nature of getting your opinion on some of the people involved I'm interested in." Rocky pulled out his notebook and recorder. Placing the recorder on the table, he started his inquiry. "Let's take Sheriff Lester first." Morgan put his feet on the floor and leaned towards Rocky. "He was a damn decent lieutenant, a bit overzealous at times, and usually taking things at the letter of the law, but he was fair. Wasn't very often that I had to overrule the rest of his. He was a good deputy, and he's making a good name for himself as sheriff now." Rocky made a note. Defensive of deputy. Doesn't want to hear a word against him. "Well, how about Sue Holmes?" Morgan's posture relaxed again as he replaced his feet on the ottoman and lit a cigarette. "She's an all right kid, just high-spirited. I know Lester felt pretty hard for her and expected her to be his girl alone. She couldn't be tied down, though. I was surprised when he said they were engaged." Rocky checked off an item on his list of questions. The deputy was on the spot pretty quick. When he said they were, The deputy was on the spot pretty quick. Was that area a regular route for you both? Sheriff Morgan rubbed his chin. Not too often, but it was on one of our routes, and if we happened to stop off at the hot dog hut for a bite, we'd head over that way and eat. Nice view over there with the field, trees, and river running through. Was Lester popular around town? Sheriff Morgan snickered. Mostly with the ladies. He's a good-looking feller, and even some of them married ladies took a shine to him. Well, didn't that make some of the husbands and boyfriends jealous? Warren shook his head. They may have carried a torch for him, but he never lit them. Rocky didn't feel this line of questioning was getting him anywhere. He sat back and tried to think of anything that might give him a lead. Sheriff, I'm going to ask you a blunt question. Do you think there might have been a mistake made? That the man they electrocuted might have been innocent? I mean, the trial was over real quick, and it seemed the judge and deputy Lester were pretty tight. That seemed to strike a nerve, and he could see Morgan clawed up for a storm. The reason the trial went quick was the overwhelming evidence. He is found with a fresh body in his lap, ready to bury it. There wasn't any doubt about it. Well, just out of curiosity, has Lester ever kept an eye out on the Stucklers? Morgan lay back in his chair and seemed to be going back to sleep. I hear tell he has checked on them once in a while. There wasn't much he could do for them, poor folks. Seems they had inherited the house and never owned a car. Miss Stuckler does odd jobs to keep food on the table and seems to make enough for what they need. I expect now our boy is reopened at his dad's station that he'll take care of her. Rocky thanked the sheriff for his time and was led to the door by Agnes. Good luck with your story, but I really don't think you'll get much new. She smiled at him with a mixture of encouragement and pity. Since it was now close to lunchtime, he headed over to the hot dog hut. He sat at a table with the wall at his back and watched people. The place had a steady stream of customers, and the servers were kept hopping. When Sheriff Lester walked in, several of the waitresses excitedly called out in greeting. He returned the greeting as a celebrity would. His order must have been consistent because he was served without having to go to the counter. He was also served without having to pay. Lester looked around for a place to sit. He saw Rocky poring over his notes and joined him. Rocky looked up just as the remains of a smirk were wiped off the sheriff's... Did I skip a page? Yep. Nope. Rocky looked up just as the remains of a smirk were wiped off the sheriff's face. What replaced it was a smug grin. Rocky closed his notebook and concentrated on his hot dog. So, how's the ace reporter from the Sentinel finding things out here in the sticks? Heard you came back from the army to this backwater town. Rocky finished off his first dog and raised the second. Hey, you forget, I was born here. My place is down on Riverside Drive. After being out in the middle of nowhere for a few years, coming back here was a big deal for me. Lester regarded him stoically for a minute. I hear you're trying to make a name for yourself by digging up one of my old cases. His voice came out in a menacing rumble that made Rocky pause. He put down his hot dog and placed his arms on the table. He leaned slightly forward and looked the sheriff square in the eyes. I was doing an interview about the jail's closing. Met a young man there who was looking after his father's move. We had some dinner, and I said I'd see if I could find anything new. Well, so far, there doesn't seem to be anything new to find. He shrugged his shoulders and finished his hot dog. Sheriff Lester looked Rocky over belligerently, then relaxed a little. He gulped down his dog in 2 bites and slurped his soda. You won't find anything new because there isn't anything new to find. Poke around all you want. The trail's cold and gone. Rocky made a mental note of how the sheriff seemed to relax once he had stated that he couldn't find anything new. To Rocky, that meant there was probably something new to find. Standing outside the hut, he contemplated his next move. Excuse me. Rocky thought about his current location and that the field where the body was found was nearby. Perhaps a survey of the ground might elicit something, or at least give him some feeling to go on. So far, he found very little, to it, nothing. Rocky headed over to the field, checking his camera en route. A small corner portion had been converted to a cemetery and now was the, hopefully, final resting place for the jailed deceased. Up the road strode Joe carrying a metal detector. The smoke from his pipe looked like the puffs from a steam train. Rocky hailed him as he approached the gate. Checking to see if your pop stayed put? Joe patted the detector and untied a satchel from his waist. Laying the detector on the ground, he pulled out a selection of objects. I come here to do a little hunting once in a while. Found all sorts of things, including some Civil War objects. Today I thought I'd try that grove over here and see what I can find. Come on, let's see what we get. Rocky followed where Joe led. He had never done any detection of this sort and was curious how deep things could be found. Well, I rarely go deeper than maybe a foot or so. He pulled out a shovel from the satchel and attached it to his belt. It was collapsible and convenient to carry. Best part is it even has a compass and a knife in the handle. I love things that serve more than one purpose. Rocky sat on a log and watched Joe work. He was covering the ground in wide sweeps, moving slowly forward. After about 20 steps, the detector beeped. He stopped, marked the area, and began to dig. He found something and washed it off with water from his canteen. A bottle cap. He flicked it away and filled the hole again. Approaching a clump of trees growing tightly together, he did the detector inside and did a quick search. I don't expect to find. His words were cut off and a squelch emitted from his headset. I wouldn't have expected anything in this area. I was just being thorough. He half lay over a root and dug. Rocky was curious and hovered over his shoulder. Joe pulled out a knob-long piece of metal attached to some cloth. Cool, looks like it might have been a medal. He washed it off, disclosing a brooch and a flowered piece of material. Joe handed it to Rocky. On the back, he scraped mud off, looking for initials. He saw something he couldn't make out. Take a look at the cloth. Seems to be a stain on it. Joe looked at it carefully. I have no way of knowing what it is. Rocky asked to see it again. I can send it to a lab we use, probably apple butter or coffee. Joe nodded and Rocky wrapped it up in paper, then placed it into a pocket. I got the chief to send it out on the QT. I got a feeling it won't be ketchup on this. Might even have belonged to the lady who was killed here. Joe stood up and regained his detector for some more scans. He waved to Rocky as he left to post off the brooch. An idea was forming in the back of Rocky's mind that he didn't like. Chief, can we post this to the lab? I want to know what the stain is. His other scrutinized the brooch, then wrapped the package in a small box. I'll tell you, better take it there and wait for the result. He wrote down the address and handed it over. I'll call Phil and let him know you're coming. Thanks, Chief. If it's what I think it is, I may have to come back to you to see about how to handle it. Nelson cocked an eyebrow at Rocky's retreating back. Rocky had been keeping me up to date on his investigation. It was the first time he had anything definite. Well, almost definite. This kid was tenacious, and if there was anything to be in the story, he felt sure Rocky could find it. At the lab, Bill took the package and carefully removed the paper. Putting it through the test, he pulled the results from the analyzer. Okay, the initial finding is blood, and it's human. It's typo positive, so as there aren't schools of people with it, the local doctor should be able to narrow it down. He sat down on the edge of his desk and folded his arms over his chest. Rocky, Bill gave me a little information regarding this. Excuse me. He called in a favor, and so I'm not going to say anything. However, if this is what you both think it is, I can come up with the information whenever you want it. Back in the Sentinel, Rocky brought out a set of magnifying glasses. He scraped a pencil tip and wetted his finger, rubbing the lead into the back of the brooch. The initials HL were scratched in the back. Odds were good. It belonged to the murdered woman, so now what? Rocky took a picture of the brooch and made some notes. He made his way home for dinner and stopped off at the Stecklers to see Joe on the way. Miss Steckler opened the door at his knock with a huge smile on her face. The smile faded to be replaced with one not quite so warming. She was dressed up as if going out. Rocky apologized for stopping by without warning, but said he wanted to talk to Joe for a moment. Sorry, Joe's at work at the garage. He'll be home around 9. She might have been in, but the invitation lacked sincerity. Whoever she had anticipated, it wasn't himself. Rocky thanked her, but said he had to get back home to dinner. Raising his cap, he turned and walked down the street. The sheriff's car passed him at the corner and headed back the direction Rocky had come from. Rocky pulled the picture of the brooch out of his pocket and stopped mid-stride. On the dress Mrs. Stickler was wearing was its twin. Rocky turned and stopped again as he saw the sheriff's car in front of the Sticklers' home. Rocky broke into a run thinking something might be wrong, but skidded to a halt as he saw Lester approach the door with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Rocky got his notebook out and made a few remarks. Instead of heading home, he went back into town to the garage. Joe was in the process of replacing a muffler. He got Rocky a Coke and sat him comfortably while he finished. Half an hour later, he stripped out of his overalls and washed his hands. Let's head over to Murphy's for a beer and a sandwich. In the cool atmosphere of the dim bar, they sat with a beer and a corned beef on rye each. Joe took a bite and savored the beef, mustard, and rye. By the look on his face, Joe was in rapture. Rocky grinned as he bit into his own. Damn good sandwiches they got here. Joe nodded agreement. Rocky pulled out the picture and laid it on the table. Joe, I hate to bring you back to earth, but we need to talk. Did you ever see this brooch on any of your mom's jewelry? Joe looked at the picture and then brought out a picture from his wallet. Now you mention it, she did. He handed over his mom and dad's wedding picture, and sure enough, it was on her wedding dress. Dad had to send up for her. She used to say it cost him a month's wages. Did she ever lose it? Yeah, a long time ago, but I guess she found it last year. She only wears it once in a while. Rocky made the sound usually spelled tisk tisk. Joe, how does your mom feel about Sheriff Lester? What do you think? She can't stand him. Joe, I saw him not an hour ago talking to your mother. I mean, he brought her flowers, and she was dressed to the nines and expecting him. Joe's face turned crimson. His hands started shaking. His fingers closed into a fist. She can't stand him. He repeated, but his voice suddenly lacked conviction. Joe, are you sure that she found that brooch and that it wasn't a gift? You mean from Lester? Rocky nodded. Joe shook his head, downing it. Could have been. Rocky, you say you saw him at our place. If anyone else had told me that, I'd punch him in the next week and call them a liar. You're a straight shooter, though. If you say you saw them, then I guess you saw them. They spent quite a while talking and reasoning things out. Joe suddenly stood up. I gotta talk to the sheriff. Rocky held up a hand. Joe, you can't go barging into the sheriff's office and accuse Lester of something. He'll just trump up reason to arrest you. Joe looked up in surprise. I'm going to talk to the sheriff, not Lester. I walked back to Sheriff Morgan's place. Agness opened the door and welcomed them warmly. She placed a hand on Rocky's arm. Visiting twice in a week. I hope this becomes a habit. Rocky grinned. He had a soft spot for her, and it was nice it was reciprocated. After he got the story wrapped up, he would start visiting more often in a social way. Sorry to say, but we need to talk to your dad again. She pouted at the news, but went to get her father. Everyone was seated in the living room, and after bringing in coffee and cakes, Agness sat near Rocky. Joe held out a hand for Rocky's picture. The picture passed from Rocky to Joe to Morgan. Joe took charge of the conversation. Sheriff, have you ever seen this brooch before? Sheriff Morgan took out his glasses and carefully threaded them over his ears. He peered at the picture and a warm smile brought his face. Yeah, sure do. Lester brought it to give to his girl. Her that was killed while I was out of town. Cost him a packet, too. He looked again at the picture and saw the cloth with a splotch on it. Where'd you find this? He asked abruptly, sitting up and leaning towards him. Joe focused on to give his account. I was doing some metal detecting and found it where the six trees circle. Pretty filled in now, but a long time ago it would have been wide open. The sheriff reached for the phone and Rocky held it fast. Not so fast, Sheriff. We think Lester might be involved. That's a pretty provocative statement to be made on such slim evidence. Joe and Rocky spelled out their idea and why they thought it. The sheriff listened and took notes. You two wouldn't be coming to me unless you had an idea how to get a confession and wanted me to hear it. Much as I hate to think ill of Lester, I think you might be on the right track, and I'll go through with it. He got up and Agness helped him on with his coat, then got hers. I'm going too. An extra set of ears just makes the case that much stronger. The men would have objected, but the look on Agnes's face left no doubt she was going along. A block away from the house, Joe gave them information on listening places that could be used and out of sight of anyone in the living room. In case of emergency, there was a shed that locked from the inside and a small treehouse that... Why should the shed lock from the inside? Agness asked. Joe grinned. Sometimes I get pissed off and go in there and mope. It was my place where no one could bother me. Well, not much in it but old rusty tools. Agness looked up at her father. In case of emergency, I'll take the treehouse and you could scoot into the shed. Father scowled and lowered his brows. So who made you in charge? She patted his stomach. He did. There isn't a way in hell you could climb up a tree and fit into a small treehouse. Joe and Rocky went ahead with Agness and Morgan waiting until everyone was inside. Excuse me. Sheriff Morgan peered through the kitchen into the living room. Seated on the dilapidated couch were Joe and Rocky. Mrs. Steckler was serving them sodas and then sat down with a cup of coffee. Rocky pulled out his picture of the brooch. Looking up, he noticed that it was not on her dress now. He laid it on the table and opened her soda. As he drank it, he kept a side eye on Mrs. Steckler. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she reached over and pulled the picture closer. Her sharp intake of breath was heard even by the ears of the sheriff and Agness. Where'd you find this? She hissed. Joe was startled by the change in his mom's face. I was doing some metal detecting and found it on the ground in the ground, near where the lady was found. Miss Steckler's face turned a dark red. She weren't no lady. She was a hussy if there ever was one. A Jezebel, that's what she was. That's my pin, and she got it off your dad. He took it from me to give it to her. There was venom in her voice as she spat the words out. She was stepping out with my husband while she was seeing that nice deputy Lester. Joe looked with shock at his mother. Ma, that pin was given to her by Deputy Lester. Sheriff Morgan said Lester saved up a long time to get it. Heck, it even has his initials scratched in the back. Miss Steckler narrowed her eyes. But Lester said your dad gave it to her. He said he saw her messing about with other men, including your dad. He was so upset about it, it made me mad. She reached over and picked up the phone. Joe and Rocky had no doubts about who she was calling. Hey, can you come over? She asked plaintively over the earpiece. She heard his affirmative answer. Morgan and Agness saw that through the curtains when the squad car arrived. Morgan pulled Agness towards the tree as he headed for the shed. Sheriff Hank Lester stomped around the house, tested the shed door, even going so far as to climb up and look into the treehouse. Everything seemed clear, but the tone of Mrs. Steckler's voice had made him cautious. As he entered the back door, Morgan slid out of the shed and Agness climbed down out of her treehouse. How'd he miss you? You looked right in. Agness suppressed her laughter. I was up in the roof with hands and feet on all four walls, just like I used to do when I hid in your closet to scare you. Back at the curtain, they saw Lester walk into the house as if he owned the place. Seeing Rocky and Joe, he stopped and looked over at Mrs. Steckler. She was shaking. These two giving you a hard time? I'll take care of it. Miss Steckler shook her head. They found her brooch, the one I ripped off her blouse after you knocked her out. Lester looked at her quizzically. Now you see, you shouldn't open your mouth. You said Joseph gave it to her, but the sheriff said you did. Lester smiled. Well, so I did. But she was going around with everyone, so I thought I'd get done with the little tramp. You know, you were a big help, just like you're going to help me now. Mrs. Steckler looked startled. Joe and Rocky looked outside the front window as if seeking help. Lester pulled out a gun and pointed at the three. He turned to Rocky. I guess I have you to thank for clearing up all the loose ends. Oh, I checked around the house and there wasn't a soul around. Nobody comes this way often, so we'll just have a nice little chat before I take you outside and finish you off. I wouldn't want to dirty up the place. Betty works real hard to keep this place presentable. Betty was crying into a handkerchief. It wasn't Joseph. He was true to me, and you made me think he wasn't. Lester laughed. Of course. Got you madder than spit, and you even helped with the details to get him good and fried. Much obliged, I'm sure. Joe jumped to his feet as Lester cocked his gun. You killed my pa, damn you! A swift kick at the door, and Sheriff Morgan was inside and had his thumb under the hammer of Lester's gun before he could fire. Agnes came in and had Betty in an iron hold as she squirmed and tried to claw Agnes off. Morgan was dragging Lester off to the squad car, calling over his shoulder, Guess we've heard enough to get this to court. Agnes, when we get home done, you write down everything you heard, and I'll do the same. Agnes pulled out a small tape recorder. Don't need to. I've got it all here. Rocky was not only at the courthouse to cover the trial, but was a witness alongside Morgan, Agnes, and Joe. The prosecutor had cut a deal with Mr. Steckler, and her testimony was almost enough on its own to hang Lester. Rocky's account of the trial made an interesting reading as he gave full color to the story. Lester was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mrs. Steckler received 15 years. Sheriff Morgan took back his job as sheriff full time, and Joe went back to working at the garage with a renewed spirit. He meant long hours, but kept his mind off his family problems. At the Sentinel, Rocky was commended and taken out for dinner by his editor. Rocky was also given first choice of the next story he wanted to cover. So that's it. That's chapter 1, and the rest of the chapters are a little bit shorter, I think. So we'll probably be able to do them, and good Lord. No, they're not. Okay. So anyways, we're done with that. We will start again probably, what day is today? What day is today? Thursday. So probably Saturday or Sunday. We'll do the next chapter. And like I said, we're going to read the entire book. So get ready for a long haul. I'm going to start putting down 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll start numbering them. So if you're coming at the middle, you can go back and catch up. Anyways, that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoyed this first story. I may see if I can find the video that I used for the first one. I sometimes delete them. And maybe I'll combine the two together, and that way we'll have the whole thing in one piece and do that for several, so you can do it both ways. Anyways, that's it for today, and I will see you all again very soon. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show.